By noon tomorrow, I would walk into my son's wedding with a deed to my house in my purse, a court order in my jacket, and 3 very polite officers waiting exactly where the cake table used to be. That's not how brides picture their day. It's not how mothers picture their sons either. But when your child calls at 9:37 p.m. and says, "I'm getting married tomorrow," your car and house are sold. You stop picturing and start planning. I am 68 years old. I grow roses named for saints and weeds that refuse to be christened. I keep my sugars in labeled tins, even though I can taste the difference between brown and white by scent alone. I carry my late husband's pocket knife in a velvet pouch and the habit of forgiveness in the pocket next to it. Neither of those things saved my son from himself or me from what he tried to do. You think you know your child because you taught him to tie his shoes and say thank you. You think blood is some sort of contract inked in the hospital and notarized by lullabies. But there are other contracts in the world, printed on parchment that smells like toner and the fear of missing something on page 16. On the phone, his voice was high and breathless, a kite yanked by a storm. "Mom, listen, it's done. I had to. Daria's family needed assurances, and you weren't doing anything with it anyway. I've got it handled. You're going to be fine." Selling my house and car behind my back sounded like an interesting way to deliver fine. "Who is Daria?" I asked calmly, because calm is the strongest instrument in a mother's arsenal. "My fiancé. Tomorrow. We want you there, but don't make it a thing, okay? And don't call. We're rehearsing. Love you." The line clicked, slicing my living room in two. I did what any proper grandmother does when disaster knocks after dark. I made tea. I set the kettle on the old gas stovetop and watched the blue tongues lick the black iron, thinking about signatures and safes. On the wall hung a calendar with little dots of red pen that marked when my neighbor, Marta, a notary and retired escrow officer, came for cribbage and gossip. People tease older women about having networks. They forget those networks are woven with thick rope. The kettle whistled. I didn't wait for the tea to steep. First, I checked the lockbox under the floorboard. My late husband, Thomas, was the kind of man who trusted but verified. We had a system of duplicates, original titles and deeds and wills in a safe deposit box at the bank, certified copies in my lockbox, and scanned copies backed up on an old laptop that has never once met the internet. I lifted the wood, breathed in the dust of secrets, and found nothing missing. Titles, trusts, powers of attorney. We had signed one last year when I had my hip replaced, a temporary document for the hospital and insurance. I had never torn it up. Guilt can make a woman keep useless papers. My fingers trembled over that sheet. A sloppy knot we never untied. I set it aside. Then I called Marta. She answered on the second ring with the immortal words, "If this isn't about a body or a pie crust, it can wait until morning." "It is about a signature that should be a body," I said, and told her everything in 28 seconds that left me breathless and her wide awake. 15 minutes later, she was on my stoop, hair in curlers, slippers like 2 angry cats. She brought her notary kit, a flashlight, and the sharpness of a woman whose children had taught her never to assume the best at midnight. "First thing," she said, flipping through the temporary power of attorney. "This expired 30 days after issuance unless renewed. It was issued 18 months ago. I never renewed it. Good. But bad if someone pretended it was still valid." She snapped a photo for her notes. "Second, we call the county recorder to see if a deed was filed today. It's after hours." Marta smiled. "My niece runs their night servers. She owes me 13 pies. Sit." While Marta pecked at her phone with the authority of a conductor summoning a symphony, I went to my desk and opened the old laptop. I pulled up the scanned PDF of the deed Thomas and I had executed 10 years ago when we put the house into the Rosemary Lane Family Trust. The trust language was simple because we liked things that way. I was trustee, sole occupant for life. Upon my death, the house would be sold and the proceeds divided equally among 3 charities, the library, the hospice, and the community garden. Thomas believed in leaving kindness behind like a trail of breadcrumbs. We told our son Aaron. He nodded and said he liked the garden's tomatoes. Marta's phone buzzed. She listened, asked a question, listened some more, and then set it down without looking at me. Say it, I told her. Someone recorded a grant deed at 5:42 p.m., transferring the property at 420 Rosemary Lane from Rosemary Lane Family Trust by Aaron Whitford, attorney-in-fact, to Northwater Capital Holdings, LLC. The notary of record is a man named C. Riley. The deed indicates an attached power of attorney dated 18 months ago. Northwater, I repeated, tasting rust. I've never heard of them. Shell company, almost certainly. Or a private investment group. The deed creates an appearance of legitimacy long enough for a sale or mortgage. They probably already set a line of credit against the property. We need to stop the bleeding. I nodded. And the car? She checked again. Title transfer initiated 2 days ago to a dealership. That can be frozen if we get the DMV on board first thing. First thing is too late, I said, and the kettle screamed again though I had not turned the stove on. It took me a second to realize it was me. Marta took my hand. We file an affidavit of void transfer and a notice of pendency. We notify the bank and the title insurance. We involve law enforcement for the forgery. And we call an attorney before dawn. I did not weep. The thing was done. Tears would be indulgence. I told Marta to help herself to cookies and sat down to write a list, because lists are bridges across rivers you can't yet see. At the top, 3 names: Aaron, Daria, Northwater. When my hip was healing, I spent my days doing little puzzles, word searches, crosswords, the logic grids where you determine who brought which casserole to which church picnic. The trick is to leverage what is impossible, because the impossible is the most informative. It is impossible for my son to have legitimately transferred a property owned by a trust without the trustee's consent. It is impossible for a notary to have witnessed my signature when I did not sign. It is impossible for me to be the woman who raised a boy who would do this to her. But only 2 of those would get me my house back. Marta's niece sent over the PDF of the recorded deed. I printed it. It was ugly, a black box stapled to my life. The notary stamp was from a county south of ours. The signature, mine, allegedly slanted in a way mine never has. The loopy are like a child's drawing of a cloud. The acknowledgement referenced an identification number for a driver's license I do not possess. Clumsy, Marta judged. They counted on nobody looking closely. People rarely do, I agreed. That's why we are going to look so closely they'll wish they were invisible. We worked until 2:11 a.m. Marta drafted an affidavit for me to sign, attesting to the trust, the lack of consent, the expiration of the temporary power of attorney, the forged signature, and my intention to challenge any transfer. We attached copies of the trust declaration, the original deed, and my hip surgery hospital discharge to explain the POA. I signed and she notarized, our breath fogging a cold kitchen where my thermostat dutifully maintained 68 degrees, no matter the temperature outside. At 2:37 a.m., I called the non-emergency police number because I am the kind of woman who follows rules unless they have failed me. An officer named Patel listened with care and the living weariness of a man who knows family cuts deepest. He took our report number and said a detective would be in touch. At dawn, I told Marta. At dawn, she said, we file that affidavit and a lease pendens. Then we call my friend at Barnaby and Wills. She's a shark who learned to knit in retirement. She will enjoy this. I slept from 3:10 to 4 o'clock in a chair, wrapped in an afghan my mother crocheted from colors she called Easter morning and I called cloudy candy. When the sky lifted its gray hem, I was awake. Marta snored on the couch like a distant car starting. I made real tea this time. I drank it while the house exhaled. I went into the bedroom that has been mine alone for 17 years and took out the dress I had planned to wear to the wedding, blue, modest, with a wild floral scarf that could be brave for both of us. I pressed the scarf between my palms. My son had loved playing beneath that scarf when he was 2, counting the flowers, learning their names, mangling them in a way that made me laugh. Lightning does not announce that it intends to make a tree a pencil. It simply completes the circuit that was available. There have been circuits in our life I ignored because they didn't spark. This was the current that made them visible. At 8:03 a.m., I walked into the county recorder's office with Marta at my heel. The clerk, a young man with an old soul, took our affidavit and stamped it with a sound like a heartbeat on a table. We filed the lease pendens pending lawsuit, though my lawsuit consisted only of a spine and a pen, and paid the fee in cash. The clerk leaned forward when I explained, and said his grandmother kept all his family's deeds in a bread tin. I imagined us like a school of gray fish, flashing in and out of disaster, following the current of paper. Barnaby and Wills answered Marta's call on the first ring. The voice that came on the line belonged to a woman who had taught in the same school as I did 38 years ago, before she left to take the LSAT, and I stayed to alphabetize the future. "Rosie," she said, "I'm retired." "Then consider this one last recital," Marta told her. By 9:15 a.m., I was seated in a leather chair that had been buffed by 1,000 anxious clients, across from a woman with white hair braided like a crown. Her name was Georgia. She read faster than the printer spit. When she finished the forged deed, she leaned back and hummed a single note that might have been approval if it weren't so tight. "2 tracks," she said. "Civil. We file to quiet title, ask for immediate temporary restraining order on further encumbrances, and motion for a preliminary injunction. Criminal. You have forgery, fraud, real property theft. The DA is a former student of mine. She believes in consequences. The DMV can flag the car. We call the dealership directly to freeze release." "Where's the wedding?" "St. Raphael's on Pine," I said. 2 o'clock. "And the sellers?" "Northwater. I don't know who owns Northwater." Georgia smiled without joy. "I do." She tapped her keyboard. "Or at least, I know who will answer if I call this number." She dialed and put it on speaker. A man with the smoothness of polished stone answered, gave the name Riley Capital. I glanced at the notary surname, and then stopped sounding smooth when Georgia introduced herself. "We have reason to believe you accepted a fraudulent deed on a trust property," she said. "We have filed a lease pendens and will deliver service of process within the hour. If you proceed with any sale, transfer, or encumbrance, you and your affiliates will be named. You are on notice." There was shuffling. The polished stone scraped. "This is a misunderstanding," the man assured us. "We have documentation. From an expired power of attorney," Georgia said. "And a forged signature. You are a sophisticated party." "Act like it." She hung up before he could reply. She printed 2 documents, slid them across, and told me where to sign. "Process server will meet us at the church at 1:30. If your son attempts to leave the county or to withdraw funds, we will know before the bouquet hits the floor." "I do not want the bouquet to hit the floor," I said. "I want him to be better than this." "Those are separate matters," Georgia said gently. "One you control in court. One you do not control at all." On the way out, Marta squeezed my arm. "You are steady as a metronome." "I am a woman who taught piano to 37 children," I said. "I know how to keep time while others lose it." We stopped next at the dealership listed on the pending transfer. The manager, who wore a tie like a leash, listened to Georgia explain that the title was flagged and any further action would invite a civil suit in which he would star. He coiled quickly into compliance. The car, a modest sedan with more memories than horsepower, would stay exactly where it was until DMV and police finished speaking sternly to one another. By noon, I had eaten a banana without tasting it and drank water that never reached my stomach. I changed into my blue dress. I pinned my hair back with my mother's comb. I put the deed to my house, the real one, the valid one, into my purse, along with the copy of the trust and the court papers Georgia had spawned through sheer force of vocabulary. I put a lemon cookie in as well, just in case courage required sugar. Then I sat on my bed and looked at the photo on the dresser. Thomas and Aaron on a pier, fishing lines stitched between them like music. Aaron was 8. He wore the serious expression he adopts for any game he intends to win. Thomas was looking at the line as if it contained the end of every story he wanted to hear. I whispered their names the way some women whisper prayers. At 1:17 p.m., Officer Patel called. "Ms. Whitford? We have enough to open a case. If you plan to attend the wedding, we can have a detective there. Not to arrest your son today, necessarily, but to witness service and ensure everything remains civil." I thought about the word civil. I thought about the word son. "Thank you," I said. "Yes." At 1:43 p.m., I walked into St. Raphael's with my head up and the scarf around my shoulders like a banner. The church smelled like lilies and wood polish and secrets. People turned. Some frowned the way people do when the past enters the room late. The three officers stood where the cake would be, speaking softly. Georgia waited by a pillar, process server at her side, a stack of envelopes severe as doctrine. The bride's family clustered in creams and pale gold, whispers like moth wings. Daria herself was at the front, veil pinned, bouquet blurred by nervous focus. She was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful, clean lines, an edge you have to respect. Beside her, Aaron adjusted his cufflinks and laughed at something the best man said, then spotted me. His face did a small, helpless thing I recognized from the day he fell off his bicycle and pretended not to be hurt. He started toward me, then stopped when he saw Georgia step forward. "Mom, can we talk later?" He called, in that tone children use when they push the conversation away and blame the distance on you. "We will talk now," I said, because there are some sentences that open doors to the rest of your life and you must say them out loud. A murmur went through the pews. The priest frowned the way gardeners frown at weather. Georgia handed the first envelope to the process server, who performed a dance both ordinary and devastating. "Mr. Aaron Whitford, you are being served. Temporary restraining order regarding the property at 420 Rosemary Lane, action to quiet title, and notice of criminal complaint." She handed him papers, then handed another set to a man I recognized as Riley from the slick phone voice, perched on the groom's side, and another to a woman in a pale suit whose expression suggested she liked puzzles only when she chose them. Aaron looked from the papers to me. "You didn't have to do this here." "You did this here," I said. "You called last night. You set today as the deadline. I am meeting it." He flushed, put the papers down on a pew, and took a half step toward me. Officer Patel appeared as if conjured by panic and put a gentle hand near, not on, my son's arm. "Sir." It was both warning and mercy. Daria lifted her veil. She had the kind of poise you see in women who grew up with the expectation that life would be arranged for them by people whose teeth match. "What is this?" she asked, looking at Georgia as if she were a caterer who had brought the wrong cake. Georgia answered without heat. "A notice that the property your fiancé purported to convey is held in a trust he does not control, that the power of attorney used is expired and misused, and that any money you expected from this transaction is ice now." "I didn't," Aaron started. Daria cut him off with a look that suggested conversations about money in their home were measured in decibels and receipts. "Is this about the prenup?" she asked him. "You said your mother would not complicate things." "Your mother," I repeated softly, tasting its edge. "I am a person, not a bank." The bride's mother stepped forward, pearls like a row of tiny bones at her throat. "This is highly inappropriate," she announced in a voice that had seldom been told no. "Appropriate," I said, "is my house remaining my house. Appropriate is my son not forging my name. Appropriate is not something your family has practiced, if this is how you interpret the word." I was not angry in that moment. I was precise. The priest approached then, face arranged in pastoral concern. "Perhaps we can move to the vestibule and discuss this quietly." "Quietly is how theft begins," Georgia said. "We will be no louder than necessary." Riley stood, showed his palms as if to demonstrate they were clean. "We believed the documents valid. We acted in good faith." Georgia's eyebrow tilted. "Then your good faith is the most gullible I have ever encountered." Aaron rubbed his forehead, the way he did when his algebra homework defeated him. "Mom, I didn't forge anything. I had a power of attorney." "You had a temporary power of attorney that expired," I said. "You used it as if it were a skeleton key to my life. You sold my car and tried to transfer my house to an entity connected to this man's office at the eve of your wedding to provide assurances to your bride's family." I turned to Daria. "And what, precisely, were you being assured?" Daria's lips thinned. She looked at her mother. The older woman did not speak. The silence said more than any sentence, written in a language of entitlement I had never learned. Officer Patel coughed. The church listened. He spoke evenly. "Mr. Whitford, MS. Whitford has filed a criminal complaint regarding forgery and fraud. We are not making arrests today. However, I advise you not to leave the county. Your devices and accounts may be subject to search pending a warrant. A buzz rolled through the room. The best man looked as if he wished the earth would open and swallow the syllables of his toast. Daria lowered her bouquet. "We need a moment," she said to the priest, and he led her and Aaron into a side room where saints gazed down with unhelpful serenity. Georgia relaxed her shoulders, just a notch. "We have done the legal part. Now comes the part that hurts." "I have had worse," I said. "Childbirth. Chemo. The year Thomas died and the nights afterward that tried to swallow me whole. I will not be eaten today." I sat in a pew while whispers fluttered like birds flushed from hedges. Marta slid in beside me and pressed my hand. "I brought mints," she said. "For victory breath." "I don't feel victorious," I said. "I feel old." "You are old," she said cheerfully. "Old and correct. It's not a bad combination." After an interval that felt like the inside of a holding pattern, the side door opened. Aaron came out first, tie loosened. He glanced around, saw the officers, saw the papers on the pew, saw me. He walked down the aisle halfway, and then stopped in the center, like a man who couldn't decide whether to confess or run. "Mom," he said, and the word was a bridge that swayed. "I am sorry. I got in over my head. Daria's mother said her father wouldn't release certain funds unless I had assets. I didn't want to lose her." I thought. He stopped. "The fairness of a sentence is not altered by the bravery it requires. Sentences land where they must." I stood. "You thought you could take from me because you believed I would rather suffer quietly than cause you discomfort. You forgot that I taught you to speak. I did not teach you to silence me." He squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them as if braced for light. "I will fix it." "You cannot," Georgia said from behind me, voice gentle. "The law fixes it. You can participate." The bride and her mother reemerged, faces otherworldly with composure. Daria approached me. "My family does not engage in scandal," she said. "We handle matters discreetly." I looked at her bouquet, the roses so tight they looked like held breath. "You engage in convenience," I said. "I wish you a marriage built on something other than that." She nodded barely, grudgingly, and walked away. Moments later, the priest announced that the ceremony would be postponed. The words fell like a curtain. People filed out in the hush of thwarted celebration. The photographer's assistant began coiling cables, the way hope coils when it is told to wait. I sat back down, because sitting is a kind of triumph when you refuse to collapse. Officer Patel approached, his eyes kind. "We will be in touch. The filings today have frozen the house and the vehicle. The DA's office will contact you for a statement." "Thank you," I said. "I will be home." In my house. At home, the house smelled like lemon oil and old books. Marta made soup in my kitchen while Georgia returned to her office to file whatever spells attorneys cast with PDFs and sternly worded cover sheets. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom looking at the dress hung back up, the scarf draped over the chair like a flag after a parade that ended early. At 5:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was Aaron. He stood on my porch, shoulders slumped in a way that would have made me reach for him any day before this one. I did not reach. I opened the door half a foot and let only words through. "I know," he said. "You have every right to shut me out. But please let me explain." "You are going to explain until the explanation is exhausted," I said. "And at the end, the facts will remain. You tried to sell my life out from under me." He flinched. "I tried to borrow it. For a day." "You cannot borrow someone's spine," I said. "You cannot borrow their name." We went to the kitchen. Marta excused herself to the living room with the grace of women who have stood between others and their worst selves and learned when to step aside. Aaron sat at the table that once hosted his math homework and my late-night grading of essays on themes the students didn't know were themes yet. He told me everything. The courtship, swift and glittering. The expectations, written in words like stability and contribution. The meetings with men who shook his hand and looked past him at the door. The idea, suggested by someone who smiled too much, that he had access to assets, that family share, that his mother had a house he would one day inherit. The power of attorney we had executed for the hip surgery, a document he had found in the lockbox when he came to get the spare car keys, a document that looked to the untrained and willfully blind like a key to everything. "I didn't forge your name," he said, finding a shred of pride where none was warranted. Riley's guy had a notary friend who, he stopped when he realized what he was about to confess. Plausible deniability is easier when you can pretend you don't understand its language. "The wonderful thing about paper," I said, "is that it remembers. The ridiculous thing about men like Riley is that they assume women my age can't read." "Mom," he said, a plea. "Am I going to jail?" "I do not decide that," I said. "I decide whether my door is open. Today, it is open. Whether it remains so will depend on what you build next." "What can I do?" he asked, like a boy with a broken toy and devastated plans. "You can cooperate. You can testify to the pressure and the scheme. You can return any money that touched your hands. You can apologize to everyone you asked to step into this mess with you. And then, this is the part that matters, you can teach yourself to live without borrowing against the people who love you." He nodded, tears in his eyes. Tears are a solvent that dissolve very little and make everything slippery. I did not reach for him. I did not clean up his tears. "I called the dealership," he said. "I told them to stop. I called Daria to tell her I couldn't give her what her family wanted. She said there was no wedding without it. I am sorry for your heart," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. He ate soup, slowly, as if it were hard labor. When he finished, he stood and looked at me like a man on a dock watching a ship he used to board without thinking. "I will make it right," he said again, in the way that men say things when they cannot yet imagine the shape of right. In the days that followed, the law did what the law is supposed to do when the facts form a straight line. The DMV flagged the title. The dealership blessedly lost interest in anything but compliance. The county recorded our lease pendens. Any bank looking to attach a line of credit found itself swimming in a pool we had poisoned with notice. Georgia filed the quiet title action. The judge signed the restraining order with the kind of speed that suggested he had seen too much of this sort of thing lately. The DA's office interviewed me, then Aaron, then Riley, who stopped sounding smooth on record and began to sound like a man who had to look up the definition of good faith. Neighbors came by with casseroles and stories. One told me about her cousin whose nephew had emptied his grandmother's account in a weekend. Another told me about a youth minister who convinced 3 parishioners to co-sign a loan for a business that never existed. They all talked about the quiet way exploitation walks in, wearing the face of someone who calls you by a name you knitted. I did not tell all of them that I had been keeping quiet stretches of doubt about Aaron for years. The times he showed up late and expected dessert. The phone calls that began in need and ended in a promise to be better that evaporated in a week. The way he flinched when talk turned to budgets. He was not a villain. He was a man without a practiced muscle for saying no to himself. For weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Georgia called. "We have a settlement offer." "From whom?" I asked, and felt like a woman interrogating the wind. "North Water," she said. "They want to avoid litigation. They propose to sign a quitclaim relinquishing any claim to the property, pay your legal fees, and cooperate with the DA in exchange for recommendations for leniency. Do you recommend it?" "I recommend secure borders," she said. "This gives us a deed of reconveyance that ends any future arguments. And it makes a public record they will find inconvenient the next time they try this." "Do it," I said. "And the criminal part?" "Separate," she said. "The DA will do what the DA does. As for Aaron, he's been cooperative. That will matter." We signed the papers in a room that smelled like toner and victory. Riley avoided my eyes. I did not avoid his. The notary for this set of documents was Marta, whose stamp fell with the satisfying weight of justice performed by women in slippers. A month later, the judge granted our motion to quiet title. The order, in language dry as a saltine, declared that the property at 420 Rosemary Lane remained in the Rosemary Lane Family Trust, trustee Rosamund Whitford, and that any claims arising from the fraudulent deed were void. Georgia framed a copy for me as a joke. I hung it in the hall anyway, between the family photos and the watercolor my granddaughter had painted of a house that looked suspiciously like mine. I invited Aaron to dinner on a Thursday. He arrived with fresh flowers and an expression like a dog that has learned the location of the fence. We ate grilled chicken and laughed carefully. Afterward, he did the dishes and then sat, drying his hands on a towel the way he did when he was young, and thought that standing very still would make me forget he had to tell me something. I started going to meetings, he said. For debt. For impulsivity. For not knowing how to be a grown man. He gave a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so tender. There are groups for everything. There are groups for everything, I agreed. And there are mothers for sons who decide to grow. He looked up at the framed order in the hall. Do you hate me? I do not know how to hate you, I said. I know how to put you outside the window when you try to come through the door with muddy shoes. He nodded. He had always understood metaphors when they contained a house. Spring arrived with the arrogance of flowers. The roses bloomed like confessions. I pruned them with my gloves that make me look like a magician with secrets. I saw Daria once at the market, her hair glossy as if it had never met a wind. She did not see me. Or perhaps she did and chose to see lettuce instead. Either way, there was relief in being a stranger again. The court eventually announced charges against Riley and his associates. Aaron entered into a diversion program contingent on restitution and continued cooperation. He did community service with a nonprofit that teaches financial literacy in high schools, and I attended one of his sessions, sitting in the back like a secret. He told the students that debt is a story you tell yourself about what you deserve, and that the ending is rarely something you would read to a child. He did not mention his mother. He did not have to. She was there in the way he pronounced the words careful and truth. On the anniversary of the day the lilies at the church tried to suffocate us with their innocence, I baked a cake. Marta came over with a pie anyway, because that is who we are in this town. Georgia brought her knitting. Officer Patel, invited as a joke, arrived with his wife and a bottle of sparkling cider. We toasted to paper and women and the curious way trouble announces its presence, like bad music at a wedding, too loud to ignore, too confident to mean well. That night, I took Thomas's pocket knife out of its velvet pouch and turned it over in my hands. It is small, functional, satisfied to cut string and open boxes. It is not a weapon. Most of my life has been like that, not a weapon, but sharp enough to separate truth from the thing that pretends to be truth. I still carry the habit of forgiveness. I keep it in the pocket next to the knife. I take it out when the day requires it, and I put it back when forgiveness tries to make me forget the lesson I paid for in fear. People like a story that ends with a wedding. I understand that. We like rituals that connect one day to the next, that help us package our hope. But sometimes the most satisfying end is a door that stays locked to thieves and opens to guests. Sometimes the happy ending is a grandmother in her garden, pruning what pretends to be part of the plant and is not, watching strong new growth insist on itself. There is a rumor in town that at the reception that wasn't, after everyone left and the janitor swept up the rice that had fallen from pockets and plans, a woman in a blue dress stood in the center of the empty aisle and sang one verse of an old hymn about grace. I will neither confirm nor deny. I will say only that tomorrow came, as it always does, and I was there to meet it at my own front door. And if anyone asks why I carry my deed in my purse even now, I say it's because I know what home is worth to people who never learn the price of a thing until someone else handed them the bill. Months later, a letter arrived from Daria. Handwritten, surprisingly. She apologized carefully, as if the words might wrinkle her. She wrote that her family consulted with new advisors, that she had called off the engagement not because of poverty, but because she recognized a thread she did not want to weave into the rest of her life. She wished me health. She thanked me for insisting on truth in a room where lies were dressed like brides. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer with my scarf pins and the childhood drawings that turned paper into relics. Aaron comes over every Sunday now. He brings whatever is on sale and the news that he found another meeting that helps, another story he can tell about himself that does not require anyone else's name. Sometimes we sit and say nothing, which is the sound of love that does not need a plot twist to remain interesting. If you're reading this because you received a call like mine last night, late and breathless, I will tell you what I told myself at the stove when the water began to boil. Make tea. Call your allies. Believe the proof more than the memory. Be the kind of woman who can walk into a church with a court order and her name intact. And carry a lemon cookie. You never know when victory will have a sweet tooth. At noon tomorrow, I will walk to my garden and tie up the stalks that lean. I will carry scissors and the habit of forgiveness and the pocket knife. I will keep the deed in my purse until it feels heavy with the boredom of safety. And I will think about the boy who called me, and the man who rings my doorbell now and waits for me to open the door, and the simple, miraculous fact that a locked door and an unlocked heart can be kept in the same house without contradiction. That night on the phone, my son thought he was ending a chapter. He was wrong. He was beginning the chapter where his mother finally taught him the one lesson she had been saving for last. The kind of love that sets a boundary is the only kind that lasts. When I walked into his wedding with my deed, there were 3 officers by the cake table. Next time I walk into a church, I hope there will be only flowers and a choir of kids with more rhythm than sense. But if the day ever asks me again to be the woman who carries the papers and the truth, I will not hesitate. I have already practiced. And if you were wondering about the car, it stayed, thank you very much, in the lot until the paperwork did what paperwork does when guided by women who do not scare easily. It purrs now when I take it to the market, as if it knows it was wanted after all. I pat the dashboard and tell it, as I tell myself, that we belong where we are. One afternoon in late summer, after the court dates settled into the sediment of memory, I found a small box on my porch. Inside was a silver key on a ribbon and a note in my son's hand, for your safe deposit box. I think I like this kind of key better. Underneath the key was another note, shorter. Thank you for letting consequences teach me what comfort never could. I put the key on the hook by the door, next to the leash for a dog that belonged to a younger version of my life. It looked right there. It looked like a promise I intended to keep. The lilies at St. Raphael's never did get their wedding that day. But a year later, I attended another ceremony in that church. 2 of my former students, now in their 40s, finally made official what their hearts had been doing for a decade. I sat in the second pew in my blue dress, my scarf like a quiet flag, and when the priest asked if anyone objected, I held my breath and let the question pass by me like a comet, bright, dramatic, irrelevant to my sky. Afterward, I stood at the cake table. It looked like a place where you could stage a coup or a kindness. I chose kindness. I cut a slice for the bride and a slice for the groom and a slice for myself, because sometimes the right thing is to share sweetness without an agenda. If you are waiting for the part where I forgave my son entirely, here it is, I didn't. I forgave him daily in small increments the way you pay off a debt you did not incur but accepted when you signed the papers that said mother. Some days I overpay. Some days I let the interest accrue and tell him we will talk tomorrow. Both are an investment. Some evenings I sit on the porch and watch the neighbors walk their dogs, and I think about the night he called me and the morning I did not collapse. I think about the difference between being nice and being good. Nice would have been whispering about it in a hallway, letting the wedding proceed, suffering later in private rooms. Good was stopping it when it was happening. I chose good. It was quieter than you think, and louder than he wanted. Time, like roses, requires tending. You prune, you water, you protect from the beetles that arrive looking like small coins of doubt. You do not apologize for the thorns. You do not apologize for the fence. When the last papers were filed and the last calls made and the last neighbor told so that the rumor mill could grind the story into flour for someone else's bread, I took the deed out of my purse and put it in the lockbox. My hand lingered on it the way my hand used to linger on my son's hair when he was sleeping, and the world was still uncomplicated enough to believe that the people we raise will never learn how to tear what we built. Then I closed the box, slid the board back over it, and walked upstairs to make tea. People who love a good wedding story will tell you that the cake is the best part. People who prefer a courtroom drama will tell you it's the ruling. I will tell you that the best part was the moment I realized I was not alone. Marta and Georgia and Officer Patel and the clerk who stamped my affidavit like a heartbeat and the judge who signed the order and even the banana I ate without tasting. The world is full of hands you can hold if you admit yours is shaking. And yes, there is one more thing. I called the charities named in the trust, the library, the hospice, the community garden, and told them the news. The librarian cried until she laughed. The hospice coordinator whispered thank you 5 times, as if saying it once would not be enough to hold back the ocean. The garden volunteer said, "We saved the tomatoes," and I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Thomas would have liked that. My son called me tonight. He calls most nights now at reasonable hours, in a voice that no longer sounds like a kite being yanked by a storm. He tells me small things, what he cooked, what he fixed, the way the sky looked over the river when he finally learned to walk the long way home. He never calls me to say my car is sold or my house is gone. He has learned, finally, the weight of other people's walls. Tomorrow, if you see a woman in a blue dress at the market buying lemons and flowers and stamps, say hello. It might be me. I will tell you where to get a good pie and a better notary. I will recommend a lawyer who knits. I will remind you to keep copies in 3 places and to back up the things that matter on a machine that refuses the internet's charms. And I will say this, because it is worth saying until it becomes muscle memory for all of us. Love with a boundary is not a door slammed, it is a home protected. That's how I kept mine. And that's how, despite everything, I kept him too. A week after the non-wedding, Georgia called at dawn with a voice like a match struck in a quiet room. "Discovery starts now," she said. "Riley's outfit will try to pretend they are fog. We will blow on it until it becomes air." I dressed in work clothes, denim skirt, sensible shoes, cardigan with elbows worn by years of leaning over students' essays. War clothes for women my age look like we are going to the post office. We usually are. Georgia's conference room had a view of the courthouse and a table that could seat 10 bad decisions and 2 good ones. She slid a folder toward me. Inside were printouts of transactions, attempted liens, draft mortgage applications, emails with subject lines that thought they were innocent, finalize collateral, confirm authority, record ASAP. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "People who fear subpoenas develop early onset organization," she said. They label things helpfully. We highlighted names: Northwater, Riley Capital, and a new one, Orchid Pines Advisors. "Same people?" I asked. "Same smell," Georgia said. "Different perfume." Then she tapped a line that made my breath hitch. Aaron CC'd on an email, 2 months before the wedding, asking a question about timelines. "He told me it all started a week before," I said. "He will have to sit in a chair and say the real date." "He will," Georgia said. "And it will hurt. And that will help." We met with the detective from the DA's office, a woman named Vargas with neat hair and a notebook that could have doubled as a mirror. She asked questions that felt like sandpaper on a splinter, irritating, precise, necessary. "When did you last show him the lockbox? Who knew about the safe deposit key? Has he ever signed your name with permission?" Each answer slid into her notes with the sound of a door closing gently and completely. "Riley's notary," Vargas said, flipping a page. "He's a cousin by marriage of a paralegal who lost his commission 2 years ago. Sloppy linkage. They all leave a breadcrumb somewhere. They think they're Hansel with a GPS. Will you arrest him?" I asked. "When the cuffs fit," she said. "For now, we collect wrists." 2 Fridays later, I attended a different ceremony in a hotel ballroom that believed chandeliers could redeem carpet choices. Not a wedding, an investor mixer. Orchid Pines hosted. The invitation had arrived by accident to my mailbox. Not my name, but my address. The post office sometimes treats streets like distant cousins. Letters arrive after long detours and confusing introductions. I called Vargas. "Would you like a date?" She chuckled. "You shouldn't be anywhere near them, Ms. Whitford." "Then you should," I said. "I'll go as a coat check grandmother if that helps." She paused. "Actually, do you think you could do something very grandmotherly?" Listen. The plan was simple because it needed to be. I would wear a navy skirt suit and pearls older than most crime streaks. I would carry a clutch with a microphone inside legal, with proper authorization, she assured me. I would approach the man with the smile that sold expired promises and ask a question any confused investor might ask about verifying authority on collateral, using phrases lifted from the emails Georgia had obtained. "If it gets uncomfortable, you leave," Vargas said. "You are not bait. You are weather present, unavoidable, calm." I practiced in my bedroom, speaking the words in a tone that suggested I had always been just a little to the left of gullible. The mirror reflected a woman whose hair refused to be tamed by hairpins. It was the kind of hair that keeps secrets and occasionally releases them in a halo. The ballroom smelled like citrus and ambition. Men in suits laughed like receipts. Women in bright jackets carried tablets and the burden of appearing impressed. I recognized Riley by his posture, upright, as if honest words might slide off if he tilted. He saw me and did the mental math of recognition versus public scene. "Ms. Whitford," he said finally, shocked into courtesy. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "The post office," I said. "And curiosity." I had a question. I opened my clutch as if to retrieve a pen. The microphone listened with excellent manners. "Of course," he said, and led me toward a quieter corner beneath a spray of plastic orchids pretending to be expensive. "I'm here for my friend," I lied. "She's considering participation." I told her to ask about collateral. "She said you attach to properties for speed, using existing authority. Durable powers, temporary ones, some are practically interchangeable, yes?" Riley's mouth did a small dance before settling into the expression men wear when they are about to convince you gravity is negotiable. "Authority attaches to relationships," he said. "If the family understands the value proposition, the nature of the power isn't so important." "So an expired temporary could be treated like durable," I said, keeping my voice blank as printer paper. "In effect," he said, "if the risk is low." "What would you call low?" "When trust is high," he said promptly, and the microphone tucked his sentence into its pocket like a souvenir. "Thank you," I said, and excused myself to the ladies' room where I stood in a stall and shook quietly for exactly 6 seconds, then washed my hands longer than necessary and watched a woman in the mirror put her wedding ring back on after conversation had required the pretense of being available. Vargas met me 2 blocks away in an unremarkable sedan. She listened to the recording, nodded once like someone tasting soup and finding the seasoning correct, and patted my hand in a way that told me she had a mother somewhere who would be proud. Depositions feel like rain that lasts too long, steady, boring, and you still end up soaked. Georgia prepped me as if I were auditioning for a role called person who says only what is asked. "No narratives," she warned. "You are not at book club. You are at war." Riley's attorney asked if I had a history of confusion. I smiled and said, "Only when men try to reshape words into tools they were not made to be." Georgia objected. The court reporter's eyebrows tried not to climb. Aaron's deposition came a week later. I did not attend. He asked me not to, and for once his request served dignity rather than convenience. Georgia summarized afterward. He admitted to seeing the old power of attorney, admitted to bringing it to Riley's office, admitted to being told it could be made to work, admitted to knowing it was wrong by the time he signed anything whose ink took longer to dry than his conscience. He cried, Georgia said, not unkindly. That will not help him in the transcript. It may help him later, when the restitution comes due in some currency he doesn't expect. There are thefts that take money. There are thefts that try to take meaning. Orchid Pines attempted both. They reached for our community garden's adjacent lot, a strip of land that the city had promised us for expansion. A rumor slithered through town that a private partner could accelerate funds. I recognized the smell the way a woman recognizes a cologne she hopes to never smell again. I went to the city council meeting with a tote bag full of documents and lemon cookies. The council chambers looked like a classroom that had forgotten the lesson and decided to grade itself on a curve. Riley's associate, a woman with a silk blouse that whispered wealth whenever she moved, presented a slide deck about public-private synergy. I presented a different slide deck, printed emails, the quiet title order, a transcript snippet where Riley defined authority as a feeling. I spoke in the voice I used to use when telling 7th graders that plagiarism is stealing with formatting. We have been here before, I said. We plant seeds. They attempt to harvest, they did not sow. Your agenda item says, accelerate. Their plan says, appropriate. The difference is not semantic. It is offense. Marta handed out cookies. Sugar is bipartisan. The vote to reject Orchid Pines was unanimous. Afterward, the garden volunteers hugged me as if I had wrestled a bulldozer. I had only wrestled a sentence. It is the same sport. A local reporter called, her voice a careful balance of empathy and appetite. Would you be willing to talk on camera? Seniors are targeted. People need to hear this from someone who looks like their grandmother. I have never aimed to be anyone's archetype, but I have spent a life being useful. So I said yes, under conditions. No family photos of children on screen, no address, no sensational music. Just the facts, and a reminder that paperwork wears armor if you knit it the night before the battle. We filmed in my garden among the roses. I wore the blue dress because branding is not just for businesses. The segment aired on a Thursday. By Friday, the church office had received 3 calls from parishioners asking for that notary who knits, and Marta had more pies than she could responsibly refrigerate. Vargas reported an uptick in hotline tips. You started something, she said. You put a face on a tactic. I put a fence around a house, I said. If people see the pickets easier now, I'm not sorry. The preliminary hearing for Riley and 2 associates unfolded in a courtroom with weary wood and a judge whose glasses carried the weight of everyone's impatience. I sat behind the prosecution table, knitting because Georgia had taught me that yarn is the enemy of nerves. The defense tried to argue that the power of attorney was ambiguous in duration. Georgia passed the judge the statute printed in a font so large it felt like it could be read from space. 30 days, she said. Ambiguity does not ride on daylight. Vargas played the recording from the mixer. Riley's voice filled the room. If the risk is low, when trust is high. It is a strange sensation, hearing a sentence you collected turn into a nail for someone else's coffin. I did not enjoy it. I also did not flinch. The judge denied the defense motion to dismiss. Trial dates were set. Outside, cameras blinked like summer insects. I went home and watered the tomatoes. Late one evening, weeks later, my phone rang at 9:37 p.m. as if time had decided to wear yesterday's clothes. I answered with the steadiness of a woman who already knows her own thresholds. Mom, Aaron said. I'm engaged. I sat down. There is a particular kind of déjà vu that tastes like metal. To whom? To no one you know, he said quickly. Her name is Maya. She works at the literacy nonprofit. We met at a volunteer event. I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like I am collecting milestones the way stray dogs collect burrs. But I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else. I closed my eyes and saw a different aisle, a different bouquet, different expectations. Are you asking for my blessing? I am asking for your presence, he said. Not tomorrow. Not next week. In a year. We are going to take our time. Her father owns nothing except his own car and his good name. He will not require assurances. Then tell him he has them anyway, I said, and smiled because the sentence felt like a door opening on a room with good light. After the news segment, I received letters. Real ones with stamps that had seen the inside of a sorting machine and survived. A woman in her 70s wrote that her grandson sold her antique jewelry for safekeeping. A widower wrote that he signed papers with words he didn't understand because the signature line was placed on the page like a dare. I wrote back to every single one. It took weeks. I used the good stationery Thomas bought for anniversaries and apologies. I told them practical things, where to file, what to say, how to find allies who still answer their phones after 9. I told them one impractical thing, to make tea first. Not because it helps the law, but because it helps your hands stop shaking long enough to hold a pen. The hospice invited me to join their board. You have a talent for triage, the director said gently. We could use that on paper and in hallways. I said yes. Meetings filled with spreadsheets and stories became a new rhythm. We reviewed budgets that practiced humility and compassion that refused to. Once, after a long session about end-of-life dignity, I walked home under a sky that looked like bruised fruit and thought about how many endings try to rewrite themselves if you supply enough denial. Some endings deserve their names. Riley's trial concluded with the jury taking exactly long enough to be polite. Guilty on counts that added up to a number you don't forget if you've ever fled a room because the ring of a phone cut your life into before and after. Sentencing included restitution, fines, a bar order that would keep him from practicing the sort of commerce that relies on charm and insufficient paperwork. He would have time to think in a place with poor lighting. Aaron's case closed differently. The DA, stern and human, offered a plea to a lesser charge conditioned on full cooperation, repayment of costs he had caused me and the system, and 100 hours speaking to community groups about elder fraud and family boundaries. He accepted. He bought a suit that fit humility and wore it to every talk. I attended the first one in a library basement that smelled like optimism and dust. He stood in front of a slide with a photo of an unlocked door and said, "I used to believe love meant access. It doesn't. It means respect. It means stopping before the line, not after." A woman in the front row cried without sound. A man in the back wrote down the phrase "line, not after," and underlined it twice. Northwater, stubborn as mildew, tried one more thing. They filed a claim asserting they had been misled by Riley and therefore should be considered bona fide purchasers for value, despite the forged authority. Georgia responded with a brief that read like a lullaby sung by a thunderstorm. The judge denied them with a sentence I wanted to embroider: "Sophistication is not a defense against scrutiny." I sent a copy of the order to the librarian. She framed it above the copier. A year later, I stood in a small garden behind a community center, watching Aaron marry Maya. The officiant was a woman with laugh lines deep enough to plant seeds in. There were homemade bunting flags, mason jars with wildflowers, and a cake baked by 3 grandmothers competing gently. Before the ceremony, Aaron took my hands. "There is no prenup to buy your house," he said, eyes steady. "There is only a promise to keep ours." "That is enough," I said. It always was. He walked down the aisle with a posture that said he had learned about gravity and kept most of the lesson. Maya kissed him the way a person kisses a man she expects to share ordinary Tuesdays with. I cried precisely as much as the occasion required and not one tear more. Afterward, during toasts, he raised his glass and said, "My mother taught me that love is not a checkbook." Today, I repay a small portion of a debt that is measured in something more durable than money. He handed me a folded paper. It was a letter he had written the night before, apologies in sentences that did not beg, gratitude that did not brag. I put it in my purse next to the handkerchief and the habit of forgiveness, which has gotten lighter to carry since the day it almost broke my shoulder. I visited Thomas's grave with the scarf around my neck and the blue dress under my coat. "We saved the house," I told the stone. "We saved the boy, at least the part that wanted to be saved." The wind moved the trees like an usher asking us to sit. I left a lemon cookie on the bench. Squirrels need rituals too. Daria sent one more letter months later. She was moving to another city, starting a business helping families plan weddings that did not ask the groom to lay his mother's house on the altar. "I learned some things," she wrote. "The hard way is the permanent way." I wished her well in my heart, the only place some wishes belong. I am not a guru. I am a grandmother with a deed and a spine. But if I were forced to condense this into a list for those who like their stories with bullet points as well as bouquets, I would say: 1. Scan everything. Paper forgets where you put it. Pixels don't if you keep them offline. 2. Temporary powers are bridges, not highways. Burn them when you're across. 3. Tell at least 2 people where the important keys live. Make one of them a woman who can bake and threaten in the same hour. 4. Believe behavior over biography. Sons are not saints by default. 5. Make tea before you make war. 6. Keep cookies handy. Tonight, as I write this, my phone rings at a decent hour. Aaron's voice is steady. "We got the apartment," he says. It's small, but the windows face west, and there's a nail by the door that looks like it's been waiting 100 years to hold a key. "Then give it one," I say. "We're coming by Sunday," he adds. "We'll bring lemons." "Bring flour," I say. "We have pies to make and fences to mend." He laughs. It is a sound like a door that finally learned how to close without slamming. If the world ever calls you at 9:37 p.m. to inform you that comfort has been sold out from under you, remember this: you have more allies than you think. Your name weighs more than their paperwork. Your house knows you. And if you must walk into a sanctuary with a court order in your jacket, walk in as if you are bringing hymns. Because you are. You are singing a song about boundaries, and the chorus goes like this: "Not today. Not this house. Not the
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe. Bye bye.